Hi, I'm Ryan Taylor, realtor with Royal LePage Atlantic here in Moncton, and these are my 2026 real estate predictions for the New Brunswick real estate market with a focus on Moncton, touching a little bit on national stuff and a little bit about economics. Quick couple of disclaimers. Number one, I am not an economist, and number two, the opinions in this video are my own. They are for entertainment purposes and not to be considered advice, and the opinions do not reflect other members of Royal LePage, any of the independently owned and operated franchises, any of the other realtors in Moncton or throughout Canada, and they do not represent the opinions of any other members or affiliated organizations. With that being said, let's get into it. Before we start with the predictions, we need to start with the current facts and data that we know now for a little bit of context on how we are going to make these predictions. Start with unemployment. So unemployment is at 6.8% nationally, and it is 6.6% here in New Brunswick. That is likely to get worse as there are public and private sector job cuts underway. Some have happened, some are starting to happen. And then inflation, CPI is at 2.4%. The core measures are on the upper end as well, so this does affect what the Bank of Canada is going to do. They use the core measures of inflation, not just headline inflation. Specific to New Brunswick, the energy inflation is completely absurd here. We have had two back-to-back 9.7% increases with NB Power, and then we have another one on the way this year if it gets approved by the utility board for 4.75%. And then they're also projecting that we are going to have two back-to-back 6.5% hikes in 27 and 28. Specific to New Brunswick, New Brunswick's inflation rate of 3.1% is the third worst in Canada. It is tied with Nova Scotia, and it is only worse in Quebec and Manitoba, which has the worst. The credit market is also beginning to crumble. I'm going to rattle off a few different facts. Equifax does what's called a Consumer Trends Market Pulse. It's a credit report that they do every quarter for the prior quarter, and it really outlines the structure of the debt market in Canada. So consumer debt reached 2.62 trillion, which is a 3.4% increase year over year. Mortgages were up 2.8%. Auto loans were up 9.6%. Credit cards were down 4.83. Regular loans were down 1.91. Universal line of credit down 3.96. And HELOCs up 5.84. A few different things here. Among people aged 18 to 35, 1 in 20 missed a Q3 credit payment. The 90-plus day dollar delinquency amount was up 19.73% year over year for people under 36 and 14.17% overall. The credit card balances are not looking very good. The balances are up 4.8% year over year. The average balance is up 0.5%. Utilization is down 2.4%, though the average credit limit is up 7.2%. New account originations are down 1.1. The 90-plus day delinquency rate for dollar amount is 3.9%, so 3.9% increase in the total amount of credit card debt that is delinquent, and 1.7% for total accounts, which are increases of 14.4 and 7.1% respectively. So these are obviously not great. Atlantic Canada had the second highest rate of delinquency dollar amount in Canada behind only Ontario. We have the third highest year-over-year rise in delinquency rate behind only BC and Ontario. Auto loans, they are up 7.7% with the average new origination being 35.9K. And this is not the average new car amount. This is the average new auto loan amount debt total. So used cars, everything, bundled debts, loan stacking, all of that. The 90-plus day delinquency rate for dollar amount is up 5% year over year. And the number of delinquent accounts for auto loans are up 10.8%. 1.9% of all auto loans are delinquent, and 1% of total auto loan debt is delinquent, which of course is bad because this next number is the structure of the interest rate, and the one after that is the duration. So 49% of new car loans were 4.99%, which is fine, of course. And 36% were 8.99%, which is what they say is prime. I get it. It's still crazy to me. Used car loans are even worse. 64.9% are at 8.99%. 24.6% are at 12.99%. 5.4% are 16.99%, and 3.6% are over 16.99%. The duration of these loans is actually quite bad too. 47.8% of new car loans are over 84 months, and used car loans, 48.4% are over 84 months. So we should not be seeing these sort of delinquencies on these car loans already. This is not good. A bit of an anecdote. I was talking to a finance manager at a prominent dealership here in Moncton, and what this finance manager told me is that easily over 80% of the subprime auto loans are stacking at least one other car onto this new loan. So this is quite bad. we're in a situation where people are stacking negative equity on top of negative equity, but the delinquencies are already rising. I didn't think they were going to rise this early. Anyways, moving on. So per CMHC, the October 2025 vacancy rates are 2.9% across all of New Brunswick, up from the very low 1.9% in 2022. For Fredericton, the vacancy rate was 2.5, which is up from 2.2. Moncton was 3.9, which is up from 1.7. Big increase there. St. John was up 1.9 from 1.6, and Oromocto was 1.2, which is flat with no prior data. Northern New Brunswick has no reliable data either. For housing starts, we had 12,521 housing starts in November of 2025 alone, which is good for over half of all of the housing starts in Atlantic Canada that month. Roughly 80,000 plus units were created in New Brunswick this year. Canadian dollar, of course, is looking all right. The bond yields are more or less what they were last year, so that's more or less flat. And the Bank of Canada did start purchasing bonds again. So population, the preliminary demographic estimates indicate that Canada's population decreased by 76,000 people over the third quarter of 2025. And by comparison, in the third quarter of 2023, Canada saw its highest quarterly population growth since 1957. In the third quarter of 2024, the population increased by 230,000 people. So what we're seeing here, of course, is the population declining. For New Brunswick specifically, StatCan has us at 868,000 in the fourth quarter of 2025, which is a decline from 869,000 in the third quarter of 2025, though this is still up from the fourth quarter of 2024. Keep in mind, populations tend to be a little bit seasonal. Certain people will leave at certain times of year and others will join at different times of year. I won't get into that, but just keep in mind the year over year is kind of important. So mortgage renewals. The renewal wave is coming. Roughly 1.8 million Canadian mortgages were set to renew between September of 2025 and September of 2026, with the worst of that coming in June of 2026. So we are right in the middle of it, and it is just about to kick off. And per a 2023 article by National Post citing RBC, $400 billion worth of mortgages were set to renew in 2026 alone, which is more than any of the years around it. BMO senior economist Robert Kavcic, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, forecasts a long and slow grind towards affordability, warning buyers and sellers against expecting any near-term recovery. Incomes need to catch up, and that takes time, he says. The sellers continue demanding prices that buyers refuse to pay. He predicts that the prices will eventually decline rather than buyers stretching their budgets further. Makes sense. All right, one more thing before the predictions, a little bit of a bridge, a little bit of context here. So New Brunswick is an overflow market. It reacts to the excess that happens in places like out west or in Ontario. The growth that we have seen in New Brunswick since about 2021 in the second half have really not been in line with the historic trend of how we've been growing our market here. So keep that in mind. Though New Brunswick has historically been insulated from things like the GFC and the 1989-1990 Toronto real estate crash, we also never really saw the boom either. And it would be very foolish to think that we would be able to see the boom post-pandemic without any of the risk of the downside. So I think the risk in New Brunswick is definitely higher than it has been advertised. Markets in Moncton, at least Moncton, throughout New Brunswick as well, also tend to lag a little bit behind from what happens in Ontario. So Ontario's peak, of course, 2022, I believe, but we only really saw our peak growth in sales at the end of 2021 and in the first half of 2022. And our peak prices are technically still really here. We had our all-time peak price in November, I believe. So if we were to follow the trend of Ontario, that would mean we would eventually see a potentially steep decline in prices. Now, a couple things too about supply and demand. So in Moncton specifically, I can't speak for other parts of New Brunswick, we have seen a huge increase in supply for both residential rentals and residential constructions to purchase. So, freeholds, condos, that sort of thing, townhouses. But that supply is not really being absorbed as quickly. I mean, we can see it in the rental data, the vacancy rate shot up, but we can also see it a little bit in the new construction market. Some of the new ones have taken a long time to sell, but also the people that have bought the new builds between 2023 and 2024, some of them have had a very hard time selling what they bought, even for what they bought. I was looking at a townhouse, I won't say where, and they couldn't even sell it for a massive loss off of what they bought. They paid well over $500 for it, and it's listed in the mid to high fours, and they can't even get offers at that price. So keep in mind, price discovery hasn't really happened yet. It might happen. It's something to keep in mind. Now, we actually did see a crash in Moncton in 2022. We saw our peak price in February for about 350K in 2022, but by the end of the year in December, it had dropped to 270K for median. All the prices here, by the way, I'm going to be using median, not average. So that's a 22% drop in about 10 months, which is about in line with what we saw in the 1989-1990 Toronto real estate crash and the GFC, around that 20 to 30% drop in the average or median price. Now, with that being said, a drop in the median price or even the average does not mean that your specific house is going to be worth less or worth that much less. It could even be worth more. It depends. A median price dropping can just be something as simple as more people buying cheaper houses due to a tighter budget, people selling their more expensive houses to downsize into cheaper products. I simply think that more activity is going to happen in the lower parts of the price points as opposed to the higher parts. I think that will drive the median and the average down. It doesn't necessarily mean I think every house will be worth less. Okay, now on to the predictions. So Canada-wide, I'm not going to try and predict it because it's way too many markets. Even if you look at the Toronto or Ontario regions, there's so many sub-markets there. It's very hard to predict. I will leave the predictions for those specific markets to the people who work in those markets. I will talk about New Brunswick though. So starting with Moncton, and I'm going to be looking because there are some numbers here I need to reference. Moncton median price is at 360K, which is up 1.7% from this time last year. Those are year-to-date median figures. Now, I expect this to drop the most in Moncton out of anywhere else in New Brunswick. How much? I think we could see the median drop around that 320, 325, maybe 330 mark. I wouldn't even rule it out if it drops lower than that, down to like 305, 310. But my personal guess, my personal prediction, if I had a gun to my head and I had to say something, I would say probably around 320. Now, St. John, their median was 335, which is up 4.7% from the prior year. I actually think that could grow, especially if the port brings in more jobs and more economic activity. St. John, of course, is the home to the largest private employer in New Brunswick, and I do think that is going to help its market survive a little bit longer or better than other places in New Brunswick. Now, Fredericton, the median price 2025 year to date was 358K by the end of the year, which is up 8.8%. Now, this is a little bit bold, but I actually think this one is going to hang on pretty well. Fredericton has a very good job base around it. Obviously, there's the military jobs around Oromocto, and you can see that in the vacancy rate data for Oromocto at 1.2. Very, very resilient market there. However, you also have a lot of union jobs, a lot of forestry jobs, and you also have a lot of central government jobs that are more or less safe in that area. And of course, 2 universities, which will help the constant demand for rentals in that area. Fredericton and St. John really have a really well-developed downtown and uptown core, which Moncton does not. So Fredericton, I think maybe they drop 5%. I think it is likely they either hold flat or drop 5%, somewhere in that range. I don't think they're going to drop further than that. They might, but I just think they're a little bit more resilient than elsewhere throughout the New Brunswick region. Now for SAT, so I think the MOI will increase province-wide. I think the SNLR will decrease province-wide. And I think Moncton will be the first one to enter a buyer's market. When? Well, this is a prediction video for fun. So don't take this for anything other than entertainment purposes. I think as early as April, most likely between May and June when inventory begins to peak, but before the inventory starts to decline at the end of the year like it always does. I think we're going to see a lot more cancellations, withdrawn, a lot of new listings that were just old listings that couldn't sell. I think we're going to see a lot of stale inventory. I think the days on market will continue to go up. I think there's going to be a lot of listings getting taken off and put back on the next day. Now, for rates, I don't think we are going to see a rate cut next week. I just don't. I don't think the data is where it needs to be. I think the core measures are too high, and I think the unemployment numbers are not really where they need to be for the rate cut to take place. Will there be rate cuts later in the year? I would say that is pretty likely. I would assume so. However, stagflation is, of course, a risk and a possibility. Now, for debt levels in the credit market, the next Equifax for the last quarter will be out soon. Now, keep in mind, this is trailing data. So these are for the prior quarter, and these are 90-plus day delinquencies. So this is almost a full year of data lag. These are great reports, but they do take time to make and come out. And I would highly recommend them too if you want to go in them. They're great webinars. Equifax does a fantastic job at these. I think that the credit market will continue to worsen in every single category. Now, that's an easy prediction, but unlike a lot of people, I think the automotive delinquencies are going to be the canary in the coal mine. not the credit cards. I think the auto loans are very problematic. Specifically here in New Brunswick, where we have a lot of wear and tear, you have to buy winter tires, summer tires often, and it's hard on a vehicle here in Eastern Canada. I think we're going to see probably the worst auto loans. We're going to see the worst auto loan delinquencies in Atlantic Canada compared to elsewhere in the country. Now, specific to Moncton, let's talk a little bit about areas I actually still like quite a bit. Starting with the West End. The West End is oftentimes priced like Birchmount or the Trinity area, but it is a much better area with better school zoning and more to offer. I still think that's a strong buy. Now, almost all of Dieppe minus most of the semis, it is really hard to go wrong in Dieppe. I specifically like the stuff that is close to Champlain Mall, close to Rue Marché, Gauvin, a lot of the stuff in that central Dieppe area. But with that being said, towards Dieppe Boulevard, Chartersville, Fox Creek, that area has really been developed quite a bit. The commercial base actually is quite nice now. It doesn't feel like you're in the middle of nowhere anymore. So definitely keep that in mind. And probably my number one value would be Stony Creek in Lower Coverdale. I don't think it's close. I understand it's, not as nice as Upper Coverdale, but it's much easier to get to downtown Moncton or really anywhere across the bridge when you're in Lower Coverdale than when you're in Upper Coverdale. And if you want to go see Fundy Park or any of the gorgeous stuff around Alma, you're way closer in Stony Creek than you are in Upper Coverdale. And again, I love Upper Coverdale. I lived on Riverbend. It's a great area. There's nothing wrong with it. I just think Stony Creek is being slept on. Same with Lower Coverdale. It's just being slept on. It's a beautiful area. Needs to be considered. Riverview Bungalows under $325. I think it's hard to go wrong there. Just make sure what you buy is, the proper size. Just make sure it checks out. I also like the Raised Ranches under $325. Of course, if anything has an income unit or an ensuite or, renovations or upgrades, that makes it nicer. But I like those price points quite a bit. McAllister Park, a sub-district in Riverview, I like quite a bit. And West Riverview, maybe my favorite. Definitely my favorite area in Riverview. So West Riverview, we're talking Inglewood, North, South. All of those areas are great. Additionally, anything in Riverview with a lot that is larger than 1/4 of an acre, a lot of the people that I find want to buy in Riverview like larger lots. And it's not super common, but it's more common than you would think, where you can find a really, really nice sized lot in a suburban district. Lastly, any dated home that is priced like a dated home. I love buying a dated home. I think the values are often great. People don't want them because they look terrible. But you know what? A lot of the times when you buy a home that doesn't look terrible, it will wind up needing more renovations than something that does. So just buy the project if you're looking for a project. Keep in mind, a lot of the flips, a lot of the things that look move-in ready, even some of the new builds, might not be that sound. Get an inspection on anything you buy, but definitely do not rule out a dated home if you're able to have the work properly and professionally done. Now, areas and subtypes that I am bearish on. Keep in mind, this is a prediction video. It doesn't mean I necessarily think every house in this type or area is bad. It just means in general, I think they are inflated and are more likely to be at risk of a decline in values than other home types. Let's start with semi-splits. If you've been listening to me for a while, semi-splits have been a frequent talking point on a category of home that I find quite risky. Let's look at 2022. So 2022, we saw your standard basic semi-split, which of course is a split entry, 3 bedrooms in the basement, and then usually, 600-700 square feet above grade. Very limited houses. They are perfect for first-time buyers if they are priced right, and there's nothing wrong with them, but they're small. You grow out of them a lot, so you want to make sure if you do move out, you're able to either A, rent it out, or B, sell it, which means liquidity is probably more important here than any other product type in the city. So 2022, we saw the semi-splits go all the way up from like 230, 240 at the beginning of the year. And I remember talking to a top realtor towards the end of the year, surprised that he was able to get 265 for a semi-split in Fox Creek. And he was like, I don't know what's happening. And then fast forward to 2022, we see much worse semis go for like 310, 315. We are talking like 2010, 2012 semi-splits that are just not that nice, starting to sell for that much. And then by the second half of the year, those same semi-splits or similar ones were starting to sell well under 300, sometimes 275, 280. And it's like, what happened? Well, that was, of course, the crash. But the semi-splits saw the biggest drop during that time. They've since rebounded. In fact, they're at all-time highs by quite a bit. But I am very bearish on this product category. Make sure you pay a good price for it. And if you own one, sell it quick, sell it now. Pinehurst, specifically when it is priced like the North End, it's a fine area. I don't mind it at all. But if you're asking North End pricing for a home that's in Pinehurst, it is not the same. You will see a common trend throughout here, by the way, where areas are priced similar to areas that are close by, but they're drastically different. In real estate, a block or street makes the world of difference. So make sure whatever you buy is based on the data of the actual area it is in, not the area it is close to. Hospital area, when it is priced like Garden Hill. In Moncton, we have two hospital areas. We have Garden Hill, aka the Golden Triangle. So those are streets like Highfield, Portledge, Bromley, Garden Hill, of course. Great streets. And then we have the hospital north end, they call it in our sub-district, which is the Moncton City Hospital, the one close to the Dumont, but a little bit further to the north end. That for a long time was one of my favorite value areas, but it has since gotten to a point where we are seeing your standard 1.5 story wartime house go for over $300K, which is completely absurd to me. And we're seeing a lot of houses on Connaught, which is a very busy street, go for a lot as well. So I'm very cautious on the prices that I'm seeing in the hospital area over the last 2 years. Now, Garden Hill, of course, is a gorgeous area. You just want to make sure if you're buying, you're not buying a home in the hospital area of Moncton and pricing it as if it is in the Garden Hill area further up Mountain Road. Next up, Birchmount, when it is priced like the West End. Yeah, it's kind of close, but it's not the West End. It is just not the West End, the same way Westbrook Circle is not the North End of Moncton. The school zoning in Birchmount is different than what it is in the West End, and it doesn't have the same appeal. So just keep in mind, they might look similar from far away. They are not. Now, with that being said, there's nothing wrong with Birchmounts. My grandparents have a house in Birchmount. It's a perfectly fine area. You just want to make sure you're getting a good deal on what you buy. Next up, middle row split level townhouses that are priced like semis. No, they're not semis. If they're on the very end unit, maybe I give them a pass, but if they're in the middle, you can't price them like semis. You have neighbors on both sides. Next, 12 to 15-year-old, I call them semi-basics. So the semis with no fancy modern design, no ensuite, no income property in the basement, no garage. Your standard, 14 to 1,600 square foot semi. I do not like these when they are priced over $350K. I just don't. Next up, new homes that are not well built. Now, I can't single out any specific builder for any negative reasons, but what I will say is there are two builders I find to do a really good job. You should look at their builds before you start looking at other builds so you have something to compare it to, even if it is not quite in your price range or if it's an area that you're not 100% sure on. Those two builders, ASW, if they are building something, and Extreme Homes, if they're building something. I think they're affiliated with Extreme Kitchens. Check out those two builders. They have a lot of spec homes around often before you make a decision on a new build. This is no shade to any of the other builders, and there are other ones I haven't mentioned that are pretty good too, but check those out before you get into the other ones, just so you have a baseline to compare it to. Okay, so those are my predictions. Just for fun, I don't know if they'll happen. We'll see. Do we see a buyer's market this year? I'm not sure, but I might be early, but I don't think I'm wrong. With that being said, I'm on Spotify. I'm on YouTube. On Spotify, it's the New Brunswick Real Estate Podcast. On YouTube, I don't even remember the name of my account. I think it's New Brunswick Real Estate, but definitely find me on both of those. I'll try to link in the description so you can find it. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, please leave them below, and I'll get back to them as soon as I can.